The cabin was higher up the mountain than I expected. The road twisted and narrowed until it was only dirt and stone, the forest pressing close on both sides. My headlights flickered against the trees, catching pale shapes that vanished when I looked again. By the time I reached the clearing, fog had settled low across the ground, glowing faintly under the porch light. The cabin looked quiet, still, almost too still, like it had been waiting for me. When I stepped out of the car, I realized how silent the mountain really was. No birds, no wind, no life at all. The air felt charged, as if humming with static. I thought it was just the altitude, until I noticed the lights, small, cold glimmers moving slowly above the tree line. They weren't stars. They weren't planes. They were watching. I never should have gone inside that cabin. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing. Pines pressed close, their needles brushing against the fog. The air smelled damp, earthy, quiet. The porch light hummed. A faint, low buzz. Even when I flipped the breaker, it wouldn't die. Flicker. Pause. Flicker again. I leaned against the doorframe. Cold was beneath my palm. The hum felt almost alive, alive enough to watch. Beyond the clearing, between the trees, pale dots floated. Small, drifting lights like fireflies, but too deliberate, too slow. They moved in patterns that didn't make sense. Pause. Shift. Pause. I held my breath. The fog curled around my boots. Every breath felt heavier than the last. The cabin groaned in the wind. Or maybe it was me. A rustle came from the brush. Soft footsteps, barely a whisper. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it. The porch light stuttered, throwing shadows across the logs. Shadows that twisted like fingers. I wanted to step closer to the edge of the clearing. Curiosity burned hotter than fear. And then I saw the lights cluster. Closer now, floating between the branches. They weren't fireflies. Not quite. The smell changed. A sharp tang, like metal and rain. The hum of the porch light grew deeper, vibrating through my chest. I tried to look away. Couldn't. My eyes followed the lights as they weaved through the trees. They were watching me, waiting. The wind stopped. The forest paused, holding its breath with me. Even the fog seemed still. I blinked. One of the lights drifted onto the clearing. It hovered at eye level, pale, blindingly pale. I thought I could hear it. Sigh. I wanted to run, feet stuck to the damp earth. Every step made the hum thrum louder. The cabin felt miles away. The light pulsed once, then twice, then it vanished. The clearing swallowed it whole. Silence. I stepped back toward the cabin. The porch light buzzed quietly again. Flicker, flicker. Alone, I touched the door. It was warmer than the air, alive in a way I couldn't name. I didn't look outside again. Couldn't. The fog drifted through the pines. A soft chill pressed against my neck. I sat, listening, waiting, and the porch light hummed on. The ridge rose like a dark spine against the night. Cold wind traced the curve of the hill, carrying pine and frost. I wrapped my coat tighter, feeling the chill in my bones. The sky stretched wide, deep and unbroken. Stars scattered like silver dust, each one trembling in the dark. I lay back on the earth, breath puffing in soft clouds. Then I noticed the lights. At first, small, scattered like distant lanterns. But they began to move, deliberate, measured. Patterns formed above the ridge, impossible in their precision. I held my breath. Every pulse of light reflected in my eyes, pale and constant. The wind fell silent. Even the trees stopped their restless rustle. They shifted again, weaving lines across the night. Geometric, perfect, unsettling. I tried to blink, but the light stayed, stubborn, unyielding. The air felt heavier, filled with something I couldn't name. My fingers dug into the frozen ground. The smell of pine sharpened, almost metallic. The lights moved in silence, no hum, no crackle. Yet my chest thumped as if echoing some distant rhythm. A pattern repeated, then dissolved, then reformed. I felt pulled, a strange vertigo pressing behind my eyes. Time seemed to stretch, seconds bleeding into each other. I couldn't tell if I'd blinked or if the ridge had moved. A breeze stirred, cold against my neck, against the backs of my knees. I imagined shadows crawling along the slope, reaching upward, but nothing moved except the lights. They climbed higher, tracing lines and curves I couldn't follow. A lattice of pale illumination, perfect and alien. My throat tightened. Wonder had slipped quietly into unease. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the lights vanished. The sky was empty, indifferent, a deep, unbroken black. My heartbeat roared in the silence. The ridge felt immense, hollow, unwelcoming. I tried to rise. Feet pressed into frost, uncertain. The smell of damp earth rose to my nose, grounding me, reminding me of the cold and the dark. I looked back at the sky, expecting them to return. Nothing. Only stars, silent and distant, indifferent to my watching. The hum in my chest lingered, as though the ridge itself had remembered. I sank back to the earth. The wind whispered again, softer now, carrying pine and frost. Alone, I traced patterns in my mind, tried to remember what I saw. But the lights were gone, leaving only questions and the ache of impossible geometry. The night pressed close. Silence settled between the trees. I breathed, slow and steady, letting the cold seep through. The ridge remained still and patient, and I lay there watching stars, feeling small. The cabin sat in a hollow, wrapped in frost and shadow. Evening had fallen, soft and quiet, brushing the pines with cold. I stepped inside, the floorboards sighing beneath me. The lantern flickered. Its pale light stretched across the logs. One shadow moved with me, small and familiar, but another lingered, taller, rigid, pressing against the far wall, shifting when I didn't move. I froze. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood. A hum hovered behind my ribs, low and unsteady. I blinked. The shadow tilted as if curious. I touched the lantern. The metal cooled beneath my fingers. The flame trembled in response. The smaller shadow danced. The taller one stayed, patient, waiting. I tried to listen. Nothing, but the silence had weight, like something breathing just beyond the room. The floor creaked under a gentle step. I hadn't moved. The taller shadow leaned slightly, stretching along the wall. I could almost hear it breathe, deep and slow, though my own chest thumped faster. The cabin smelled sharper now. Earth, old wood, and something metallic I could name. The flame shivered again, and the second shadow. It shifted closer to the corner. I wanted to leave. Feet rooted to the cold, uneven boards. Every instinct screamed to move, but I couldn't. My eyes traced the walls. The taller shadow's edges blurred, then sharpened. It mimicked nothing I did, yet mirrored my unease perfectly. I felt a chill run up my spine. A soft static filled the corners of the room, faint, almost imagined. I exhaled, slow and deliberate. The shadows stretched with a flicker, playing across rough logs and empty chairs. The hum behind my ribs deepened, pressing in. Alone, I realized I wasn't the only one here. I stepped closer to the lantern. Its warmth kissed my fingers, grounding me. The familiar shadow followed, obedient. The taller one stayed, patient, distant, almost aware. I watched. The room held its breath with me. Every flicker of light, every shift in the shadow felt deliberate. Time thinned, stretched. The lantern wavered, barely holding the darkness at bay. I imagined the shadow moving toward me. Then it didn't. It stayed, looming but still. I wanted to speak. Nothing came. The hum receded into silence, leaving only cold and the scent of old wood. I sank to the floor. The lantern's light warmed the space around me. Shadows leaned back against the walls, still and patient. Alone, I realized how small the room felt, and how large the darkness had grown. The taller shadow stayed. It didn't vanish. It simply waited, watching me watch it. I breathed slow, feeling the weight of the silence, the frost creeping through the cracks. The lantern flickered once more, a pale pulse in the quiet, and I stayed, still, listening to hum of my own heartbeat and the patience of shadow that did not belong to me. The cabin sat in frosty air. Night pressed against the windows, heavy and silent. Pine needles rustled softly in the cold wind outside. The radio hummed, a low, constant buzz that filled the corners of the room. I hadn't touched it, yet it spoke in static. I leaned closer, fingers brushing the cracked wood table. The hum shifted, ebbing, growing sharper. Beneath it, faint voices murmured. Languages I didn't know, curved words I couldn't place. Soft, urgent, distant. They slid across the walls, brushing my ears, my neck, my chest. I pressed my palm to the table. The vibration traveled through my bones. A cold draft drifted past, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic, something old. The voices rose a fraction. Whispers layered over each other. A cadence that almost made sense, then broke apart. I tried to focus. Couldn't. The radio flickered. Tiny sparks of light in the darkened dial. The hum thickened, pressing at my ribs. The shadows in the corners stretched, lengthening in time with the static. I took a breath. Cold air filled my lungs. The murmurs shifted, words curling, folding into shapes I didn't recognize. Almost like they were aware I was listening. I reached toward the radio, fingers hovering, trembling. The voices receded, then returned louder, sharper. I could feel the vibration in my fingertips. The room felt smaller. The hum echoed in the walls and the floor, through the very air. Even the candle flickered with a nervous tremor. Shadows leapt and shrank with each pulse of sound. I couldn't look away. The static formed patterns I didn't understand. Faint shapes, like letters floating on fog, melting into each other. The voices whispered closer. I couldn't recognize words, yet each tone pressed against memory, against fear I didn't know I carried. I shivered. The cold seeped deeper, past my skin, into the stillness of the room. I stepped back. The hum receded slightly. The whispers lingered, brushing the edges of my mind. I tried to ground myself. Fingertips cold on the table. Breath steady, slow, deliberate. The static softened. The radio's glow dimmed. The voices faded into something almost musical, almost human, almost familiar. I sat listening, alone in the cabin, pressed between shadow and hum. The pine outside whispered through the night. The frost wrapped around the walls. The radio hummed quietly, nothing more. The voices were gone, but I could still feel them, lingering in the air, curling around the corners, brushing against my ears, watching in silence. I let my eyes close. The hum slowed. The cabin breathed with me, and for a long while there was only quiet. The snow lay thick around the cabin. Moonlight glinted off icy branches. The wind was absent, leaving only cold and stillness. At midnight I woke. Soft creaking floated down from above. Footsteps, deliberate, slow, pressing against the roof. I held my breath. The snow outside was untouched, smooth and pale, but the sound pressed closer, higher, curling into the walls. I touched the windowsill. Cold glass, frost bited my fingers. The steps shifted, light and heavy, circling above in no pattern I could follow. I wanted to move. Feet felt rooted to the floorboards. Each creak echoed in my chest. Alone, I realized I could hear the snow settling, faint, unnatural. The moonlight stretched through the cabin, casting long shadows. They wavered as the roof whispered above me. The air smelled faintly of cold pine and something older, metallic, lingering. The steps paused. Silence pressed in, heavier than the snow, then resumed, lighter now, careful, deliberate. It was almost patient, almost waiting. I stared at the ceiling. The floor beneath me seemed to hum in response to the weight above. Every heartbeat drummed in the quiet. Morning came slowly. Pale light seeped through frost-laced windows. I stepped outside, snow crunching underfoot. No tracks led away. None came toward the cabin. But the snow over the roof sagged inward, pressed down in unnatural lines. I ran my fingers along the snow. Cold, wet, silent. It didn't yield, didn't crumble. Just pressed. The forest around the cabin remained still. No wind, no rustle. Only the lingering hum of the roof, pressed inward by invisible weight. I breathed slowly, tasting frost and pine. The steps had vanished, leaving only quiet, and the snow unbroken, holding the memory of something that had walked above me. I stayed inside, listening to the silence. The cold seeped through the logs, through my skin. The cabin exhaled with me, and I understood the stillness was not empty. It was waiting. The loft smelled of cold wood and dust. Night pressed against the small window, frost curling along the edges. I leaned forward, breath puffing in soft clouds. Below, the cabin slept in silence. Above the ridge, faint lights glimmered along the mountainside. Soft, pale, steady. I watched them. One by one, they shifted, drifting closer. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of pine and snow. A rustle came from the rafters. I froze. The lights moved again, deliberate, gliding down the slope. The hum of the wind pressed through the logs. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating through my bones. The lights multiplied, weaving patterns I couldn't name, yet felt familiar. I touched the sill. Cold, rough against my palm. The loft seemed to shrink around me, walls pressing inward. I could almost hear the snow settling on the roof, soft and uneven. The lights drew nearer. I could see each one glimmering, tiny orbs, hovering, patient. The forest below lay still, holding its breath. I wanted to step back. Feet pressed the floor, frozen. Each light traced a path closer to the cabin. Shadows stretched and shifted in the corners of the loft. The air tasted sharp, metallic, and damp. I held my breath. The hum from outside threaded through the walls, low, almost musical. The lights paused, lingering near the tree line, then drifted again, closer, slower. I imagined them pressing against the cabin, brushing the roof, the walls, the windows. I swallowed, cold tongue catching. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. I sank to the floor. The loft smelled of wood and frost. The lights edged nearer, tracing the slope of the hill toward me. I could feel their presence in the shadows, in the hush, in the space between heartbeats. They paused at the edge of the clearing, pale, patient, hovering. I couldn't see faces or forms, just presence, waiting, watching. I lay back, chest pressing against the boards. Frost seeped through the floor, creeping over skin. The light stayed, still and near, a quiet pressure in the night. I closed my eyes. The hum receded, but the awareness lingered. Alone, I breathed slow, letting the chill settle in. The lights did not vanish. They waited along the mountainside, patient as the night. The cabin held its breath. Night was thick, pressing against the windows. Cold seeped through the cracks, carrying the scent of pine and frost. At 3 a.m., there was a knock. Slow, deliberate. It lingered, echoing against the walls. I froze, fingers brushing the wood of the table. The hum of the wind outside threaded through the logs. The knock came again. I stepped forward, boots cold against the floorboards. Each breath felt heavier than the last. The air smelled metallic, sharp and still. I reached the door, hand hovering, shaking slightly. The knock did not come again. Only silence, thick and patient. I opened it. Nothing. The snow lay undisturbed at the edge of the porch. But faint footprints led away. They glowed, pale and trembling, fading into the dark. Each step pressed inward, toward the forest, not away. I leaned closer, the cold biting through my coat. The snow hummed under my fingers, soft, alive. The night seemed to exhale around me. Every shadow stretched toward the footprints. The wind whispered, brushing pine and frost against my ears. I wanted to follow, but feet felt heavy, rooted. The porch light flickered. Shadows shifted against the cabin wall. The footprints glimmered faintly, patient and deliberate. They did not vanish, though the snow was still. I stepped inside, closed the door softly. The hum of the cabin pressed around me. Alone, I could feel the weight of absence, the echo of someone or something just gone. I watched the door. The night waited, breath slow, chest pressing against cold wood. The footprints remained in my mind, glowing faintly behind my eyes. The wind settled, soft and quiet. The pine needles rustled only occasionally, like soft whispers. The snow lay untouched. The footprints led away, carrying a presence I could not see. I sank to the floor. The cabin pressed against my back, warm and wooden, but the air still hummed faintly with the memory of the knock. Alone, I realized a visitor had been here, and yet had never truly arrived. I closed my eyes. The glow of the footprints lingered in my mind, stretching into the darkness outside, and I breathed, slow and steady, counting the seconds, waiting for the knock that might never come again. The fog clung to the trees, thick and cold. Moonlight barely touched the clearing, pale and muted. I stepped outside, boots crunching softly against frost. Figures stood at the tree line, motionless, pale against the fog, like statues forgotten in the woods. I held my breath. The wind carried pine and damp earth. Each exhale felt heavier than the last. The figures didn't move, yet I felt them shift in awareness. The ground pressed cold beneath my feet, soft frost curling around my ankles. The shadows of the figures stretched toward me, long and thin, their heads tilted in unison when I stepped closer. I froze. The fog swirled, brushing my cheeks with chill. A hum lingered in the air, faint, almost imagined. The figures didn't speak. They only watched. I wanted to turn back, feet rooted to frostbitten earth. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath. Every pine needle and brittle branch paused in stillness. The figures remained pale, patient. The tilt of their heads mirrored each movement I made. I felt the space shrink, pressing inward from all sides. Cold seeped through my coat and into my bones. I inhaled slowly, tasting frost and damp leaves. The fog pressed against my face, heavy and unyielding. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. Alone, I realized I was being studied, measured. A branch rustled behind me. I didn't turn. The figures' heads tilted again, synchronized, deliberate. The clearing itself felt alive with attention. I took a step back. The frost cracked underfoot, loud in the stillness. The figures remained unmoving, their gaze fixed, relentless. I sank to the ground, pressing palms into cold earth. The fog swirled around me, brushing ears and neck. The figures did not approach. They simply waited, pale and patient, at the tree line. I closed my eyes. The forest exhaled. Every sense sharpened. Cold, smell, hum, breath. I stayed, listening to night, and feeling the relentless weight of eyes that would not blink, that would not leave. The cabin shivered under frost and night. Air hung thick, heavy with cold. Pine needles scraped lightly against the windows. A low hum rose through the walls, vibrating, pressing against the glass. I pressed my palms to the windowsill. The wood trembled beneath my fingers. Breath came in small clouds. The hum seeped into my chest, into the floorboards, through the logs. The frost smelled sharper, metallic, alive. Every sound outside, the rustle of pine, the settling of snow, was drowned in it. I stepped back. The hum thickened, resonant, impossible to ignore. The cabin shivered again. Windows rattled, brittle with cold. I lifted my gaze. The stars were gone. A mass filled the sky above the ridge. Something immense, vast, blotting out the night. I froze. Cold pressed through my coat, through skin and bones. The hum thrummed against my ears, my teeth, my chest. The air smelled faintly of ozone and frost. It didn't move, yet I felt it, an awareness in the space above. The silence beneath the hum was heavier than any sound I'd known. I stepped closer to the wall, fingers brushing rough wood. The hum grew softer, resonating like it was watching, waiting. Every heartbeat echoed in rhythm with it. I tried to make sense. Stars had vanished. Darkness was absolute, yet the air vibrated with pressure, presence, impossible weight. I breathed slowly. Cold air filled my lungs, metallic and sharp. The logs of the cabin seemed to hum in response. Shadows shifted, stretching long against frostbitten boards. Time thinned, each second lingering like fog. The mass in the sky did not move, did not flicker. It simply filled space, pressing against perception. I felt smaller, lighter, almost unreal. I sank to the floor. Cold seeped through my legs, biting. The hum vibrated through the cabin, threading through the walls. The air pressed against my face, heavy, expectant. I blinked. It remained, vast, silent beneath its resonance. Alone, I realized the sky itself had changed, and that nothing would be the same in the cold and stillness of the night. I closed my eyes. The hum persisted, low, insistent. Frost brushed the logs. Pine pressed against the windows. And above, the sky waited, overwhelming, immense, patient. The woods were quiet, heavy with frost and shadow. Branches creaked softly in the still air. My boots pressed into damp pine needles, muffled beneath the fog. A glow appeared, soft, bobbing gently between the trees. Warm, pale light in the cold dark. I stepped closer. The lantern floated, drifting as if carried by an invisible hand. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, metallic faintly beneath. The fog wrapped around my legs. Each breath pressed against my chest, slow and deliberate. The glow shifted slightly, leading deeper into the forest. I want to call out. My voice caught in my throat. Silence answered, heavy and patient. Shadows stretched along the trunks. The lantern swayed, rhythmic, gentle, unbound. No footsteps followed it. No figure carried it. I reached forward. The air felt warmer near the glow, soft against my fingers. A hum hovered faintly beneath the trees, low and steady. Pressing in, I stopped. The lantern paused. Fog curled around its light like smoke, shifting, alive. I realized the forest had stilled. Even the wind had gone quiet. The glow edged closer. I could see the lantern's metal frame, small, intricate, fragile. It bobbed above roots and frost, almost dancing. The scent of earth and cold pressed against my face. Sharp, alive. I crouched, watching it drift near a fallen log. The hum threaded through the shadows, wrapping around the trees. It didn't vanish, didn't flicker. It moved with purpose, gentle, deliberate, patient. I wanted to follow. Feet pressed into frost, hesitant. The lantern glowed in the dark, silent invitation. Yet something in the stillness held me back, careful, aware. I inhaled, tasting frost and pine, feeling the damp press against my skin. The lantern bobbed, turning slightly, as though studying me or waiting. I sank to the ground. Cold pressed through my coat. The fog curled around me, brushing ears and neck. The glow stayed, unwavering, floating deeper into the woods. I closed my eyes. Breath slow, measured, quiet. The lantern lingered in my mind, warm against the cold, soft against the silence. And though I could not see its hand, I felt its presence watching, patient, and impossible to reach. The cabin sat quiet beneath the frost-thick night. Moonlight pressed against the windows, pale and hesitant. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, cold and sharp. The phone rang. I froze. Its bell echoed thinly through the empty cabin. Disconnected, unplugged, it should not ring. I pressed my fingers to the receiver. The cord was stiff and cold beneath my hand. The hum of the walls pressed against my chest. The bell rang again, slow, deliberate, insistent. I lifted the receiver. Breath caught in my throat. A whisper came. My name. The sound was thin, fragile, almost drifting away. But it carried weight, pressing into my ears, my mind. The frost on the windows rattled softly with the vibration. Shadows in the room stretched long and thin. I set the receiver down, shaking. The phone rang again, insistent. No one on the line. Yet I felt it. Presence, patient and deliberate. The hum of the cabin shifted. Walls pressed closer. The floorboards beneath my boots seemed to thrum with the echoes of the voice. I pressed my palm to the table, grounding myself. The whisper returned, faint and deliberate, closer this time, threading through the lines, curling into my ears. I shivered, cold seeping past my coat, into skin and bone. The room held its breath. Each exhale of mine seemed louder than it should. The frost outside crackled faintly. The shadows wavered against the walls, stretching toward the phone. I could not move. The voice called my name again, thin, insistent, patient. I swallowed. The cold pressed against my tongue. I wanted to leave. Feet felt rooted to the boards. The bell rang once more. The whisper lingered after, curling into silence. I pressed my hand against the receiver. Cold, rigid, impossible to still. The cabin seemed to fold in, walls breathing with me. Each heartbeat thrummed against the ringing, against the whisper. I sank to the floor, fingers brushing frost-dusted boards. The hum of the cabin wrapped around me. The phone remained silent, yet I could feel it calling, my name, stretched into the night, into the air, into the stillness around me. I closed my eyes. The whisper lingered in memory, warm against the cold, pressing gently, impossibly close. Alone, I breathed slow, letting the frost and shadow hold me. The cabin held its breath with me, and the phone waited, patient, impossibly patient. Its echo folded into the silence. Morning broke pale and slow. The fog clung low to the clearing, damp against my boots. Pine needles pressed wet beneath my fingers as I stepped outside. The grass caught my eye, a perfect circle, burned into the clearing, edges crisp and strange. The earth smelled of smoke and frost, faint and unsettling. I knelt to touch it, cold pressed into my fingertips. The air shifted, heavier now, pressing against chest and throat. I stood within the circle. The forest fell silent. No wind rustled the pines. No bird dared stir. Even the snow melting on distant branches seemed frozen in place. Breath slowed. I pressed my palms to the grass, feeling the burn beneath skin subtle but firm. The fog curled around me, brushing ears and neck. The hush was patient, deliberate, watching. I stepped carefully, small movements amplified by the stillness. The circle held a weight, quiet but pressing. Shadows at the edges of the trees stretched long, waiting. Every sound of my boots on frost felt loud, intrusive. The sun tried to pierce the fog. Light fell unevenly, pale and hesitant. The circle seemed untouched by shadows, absorbing them instead. The hum of the forest was gone, leaving only my heartbeat echoing. I knelt again, inhaling frost and pine. Each breath tasted cold and metallic, thick in my lungs. The circle beneath me pulsed faintly, almost imperceptible. It pressed awareness into my skin, into my mind. I walked slowly within it, feeling the weight shift beneath feet. Each step deepened the silence. The trees leaned, or perhaps my mind imagined them leaning, listening. Alone, I realized the clearing was no longer just space. The fog swirled, brushing my face. Every sense sharpened, sight, sound, touch. The circle was patient. It held me. It observed, and the forest obeyed. I knelt one last time, fingertips brushing frostbitten grass. Cold seeped through my coat, into skin and bone. The hush pressed around me, dense and complete. I could feel the clearing itself, alive in its stillness. I stepped out slowly. The forest exhaled, leaves rustling faintly. The circle remained, perfect and unbroken, an imprint of something deliberate, patient, and impossible. I closed my eyes, breath slow, measured, quiet. The fog drifted around me, carrying pine and frost, and the circle waited, patient as the morning, impossible to ignore. The cabin breathed with night, cold pressed against the walls, slipping through cracks in the logs. Pine and frost clung to the air, sharp and alive. A thin beam of light entered through the ceiling. It cut the darkness like a knife. Pale, searching, deliberate. I froze, breath clouding in the cold air. The light moved slowly, drifting across the walls. It paused, then shifted again, like it knew I was here. The floor beneath my feet creaked softly. I pressed my hands to the rough boards, grounding myself. The hum of the night pressed against my chest. The light brushed across the table. Objects caught and flared, shadows dancing, stretching, shrinking. The air smelled faintly of metal and smoke. I could feel it tracing my spine, careful, patient. I stepped back. The beam moved with purpose, tracing the cabin, lingering over the loft, the walls, the frostbitten windows. Silence thickened around me, heavier with each passing second. I wanted call out. Words lodged in my throat. The light drifted near, slow, deliberate, and I realized it was searching. Not just a cabin, but me. The shadows lengthened. The hum threaded through the logs and boards, subtle, insistent. I could feel the cold pressing past my coat, biting into skin and bone. The air grew heavy, stifling, static in its presence. I sank to the floor, hands brushing rough boards, frosted edges biting fingertips. The beam lingered above, scanning, watching, unyielding. I dare not move, dare not breathe too loud. The light drifted closer, pale, insistent, precise. Every shadow in the cabin shifted with it. It held the room in a quiet, deliberate tension. I pressed my face against the boards. Cold seeped through, sharp against cheeks. The hum vibrated faintly in my ears, threading through ribs and skull. I could feel the air tighten, wrapping around chest and neck. The light paused, thin and perfect. It lingered above me, patient, searching. I could not see its source, only the movement, the awareness, the quiet pressure of presence. I closed my eyes. Breath slow, measured, careful. The beam remained, hovering, tracing, patient as a night. Alone. I felt it in every shadow, in every cold breath, in the hushed heartbeat of the cabin. And I stayed, pressed to the boards, listening, waiting, as the light moved gently through the darkness, searching, stifling, unseen but known. The forest lay heavy under frost and fog. Branches hung low, dripping with dew. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, sharp and alive. A figure perched on a branch. Still, eyes glowing faintly, pale and unblinking. The owl watched, patient, unmoving. I stepped closer. Footsteps soft against wet needles. The fog curled around ankles, brushing cold against skin. Each breath tasted metallic, sharp. The owl did not shift. Its gaze held me, silent, weighty. The forest seemed to pause. Even the wind stilled, leaving only the hum of frost settling. I reached out, instinct more than thought. Branches scraped my coat, rough and cold. The owl's eyes remained, watching, patient. A faint pulse of light from its gaze pressed into my chest. I drew nearer. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though it were holding its breath. Needles and frost crunched under careful steps. The owl tilted its head slightly, deliberate, aware. Then it vanished. No rustle, no wings. Only the faint smell of pine and frost lingering in its place. A silence pressed in, sharp, unbroken. I lingered, fingers brushing the branch where it had perched, cold and rough. The fog swirled around, curling at my face and ears. Something in the forest shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. I could feel it, the absence, a presence folded into emptiness. Shadows stretched and bent, leaning against trees. The air hummed faintly, vibrating through logs and frostbitten earth. Alone, I realized the owl had not simply left. I stepped back, boots pressing soft into damp needles. Breath shallow, measured. The forest exhaled slowly, leaves rustling faintly in a distant rhythm. The glow was gone, but the memory of it lingered, cold against my skin. I sank to ground, hands brushing frost-dusted logs. Every sound echoed, distant drip of water, faint shift of branches, my own heartbeat. The owl's eyes had burned into memory, patient, silent, impossible. I closed my eyes. The fog wrapped around me, cool against my face. The forest resumed its quiet hum, careful, watchful, and in the hush, I could still feel those faint glowing eyes lingering somewhere beyond sight, beyond reach, and impossibly present. The night pressed against the cabin. Frost gathered on the window panes, soft and uneven. Pine and damp earth clung to the air, sharp and heavy. I noticed it first in the floorboards. A subtle shift. Not wind, not frost, but a movement that seemed alive. The cabin exhaled slowly, quietly, beneath my boots. Walls stretched, then contracted. A soft pulse, rhythmic, deliberate, like breathing. The air hummed faintly, pressing against chest and throat. I pressed a hand to the rough wood, cold, solid, yet somehow pliant beneath my fingers. The hum threaded through logs and boards, faint and insistent. The frost outside shimmered in the pale light, each crystal trembling slightly. I stepped back. The cabin expanded around me, subtle, imperceptible at first, then contracted again, gentle, patient. I could feel the motion in my ribs, the walls pressing close, retreating. I sank to the floor, fingers brushing frostbitten boards. The hum persisted, low, intimate, almost whispering. Shadows stretched and shifted in the corners, elongating and folding as if breathing with the cabin itself. The ceiling groaned softly, a hollow, distant echo. I held my breath. Each inhale carried the scent of wood, pine, and something faintly metallic, sharp and alive. The cabin shifted again, slow, deliberate. I pressed my face to the wall, cold, solid, yet moving. The air seemed to pulse in rhythm with the structure, pressing against ears and chest. Even the frost outside seemed to pause, waiting. The hum deepened, vibrating faintly through floor and log. I could feel in my bones, threading warmth and cold together, surreal, impossible. The cabin breathed around me, patient and deliberate. Alone, I realized it was not just a building. It was presence, alive in its own slow, patient rhythm. I closed my eyes, hands pressed to the boards, grounded myself in frost and wood. The cabin exhaled, drawing the air from the night into its rhythm. Shadows softened, stretched, then curled around the corners. I felt it everywhere, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, pulsing, breathing, alive with patient intent. And I stayed, quiet, pressed to the cabin, listening to its slow inhale, its measured exhale, the rhythm of the structure that watched, that breathed, and that would not forget. The fire pit smoldered faintly. Smoke curled into the fog, pale and restless. Ashes lay scattered, cold and gray, pressing into the frostbitten earth. I noticed a line. Ashes stretching from the pit into the forest, delicate, deliberate. The trees leaned closer, dark trunks blurred by mist. I stepped toward it. Frost crunched softly beneath boots. The air smelled of smoke and damp pine, sharp against skin. Every breath seemed amplified, every exhale heavy and slow. I followed the trail. The ash pressed faintly into the earth, a path meant to be noticed. The forest grew quiet. Even the wind softened, hesitant. A whisper brushed my ears. My name, thin, distant, curling through the mist. I froze. The trail pressed onward, patient and deliberate. Branches scraped against my coat. Needles and frost brushed my fingers. The whispers returned, closer, faint and urgent, carrying my name again. I swallowed, cold biting throat and chest. I moved carefully. Each step felt louder than it should. The forest folded in around me, shadows stretching and bending in the fog. The ashes glimmered faintly in the pale light, leading me forward. The whispers pulsed with the rhythm of my steps. Not words, not sentences, just presence, deliberate and patient. I could feel it pressing through the trees, threading into the frost, threading into my bones. I stopped, bent to touch the trail. Cold pressed through my gloves. The ash felt heavier here, as if holding memory, holding awareness. The whispering grew faintly stronger, curling through my ears, curling around my chest. The trees leaned closer, still, patient. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. I followed again, slow, deliberate. Every step pressed deeper into the hush of the forest. The ash wound between trunks and shadows, impossible to ignore. The hum of the night threaded into my awareness, low, insistent, patient. I could feel the air tighten, brush against skin and hair. Breath shallow, careful. The whispers called my name again, lingering, impossible to locate. And the trail continued, leading me further, deeper, alone. I knelt beside the line, fingers brushing frostbitten ash, cold and fragile. The forest seemed to exhale softly, patient, deliberate. Even the fog trembled faintly, curling closer around my face. I rose slowly. The trail of ashes stretched ahead, endless in the mist. Whispers lingered, faint, patient, curling through the trees, calling. And I stepped forward once more, following the quiet, deliberate path, feeling it reach into the night, into me, into the hush of the forest itself. The nights grew heavy. The frost pressed against the cabin windows, crisp and brittle. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and the distant smoke of dying fire. I looked up. The stars were gone, not hidden by clouds, not blurred by fog, simply absent. The sky stretched, black and empty, a hollow expanse that pressed on the chest. A faint shift moved across the heavens. Shapes, pale and unformed, drifting silently. They glided with deliberate patience, slow and impossible, like currents in some cosmic ocean beyond reach. I pressed my palms to the frost on the window. Cold bit fingers through gloves. The hum of the night threaded through the walls, low and insistent. I could feel it in my bones, a vibration without sound. The shapes moved closer. Impossible to measure, impossible to name. They shimmered faintly, brushing the darkness with impossible light. I could feel them in the breath of the forest, in the hum of the earth itself. I stepped outside. The frost crunched softly beneath boots. Air sharp against lungs, biting chest and throat. The silence of forest pressed around me, thick and unbroken. The shapes drifted, slow, deliberate, their presence unyielding. No wind moved, no stars pierced the black. Only these faint, gliding forms and the hum threading through the night. I felt the sky bend, weightless and vast. Every tree, every branch, every frozen needle seemed to tilt toward it. Even the snow pressed inward, heavy and patient. I could hear nothing, yet the world vibrated with intent. I reached out instinctively, air cold against fingers. The shapes shimmered faintly in response, drifting, curling, as if aware of my gaze, my presence, fragile and small beneath the void. I sank to the ground, hands brushing frostbitten earth, cold, unyielding. The silence folded in around me, breath sharp, shallow, fragile. The shapes hovered, drifting across the empty sky, patient, inevitable. Nights passed. The stars did not return. Only these pale shapes, gliding, deliberate, threading their quiet to the hum of the world. I could feel them in every shadow, in every rustle, in every heartbeat that pressed against the cold, hollow air. I closed my eyes. The black sky stretched infinitely above, and the shapes moved slowly, beyond recognition, beyond fear, but never beyond notice. Alone, I felt the vastness press closer. Breath shallow, wind still. The hum threaded through ribs, through frost, through snow and wood. The stars were gone, and the night itself seemed to watch. Snow pressed softly against the cabin walls. The night was still, almost expectant. Cold air drifted through the small cracks around the window frames, carrying pine and distant smoke. I noticed it first in the corner of my eye, a pale shape leaning just beyond the frost. I turned slowly. A face pressed against the window, long, expressionless, impossibly still. Eyes that reflected the faint cabin light, yet carried nothing. I froze, breath held, mist curling and fading into the cold. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and biting. My heartbeat pressed loud, soft thuds against ribs. I moved closer, compelled, hesitant. The face did not blink, did not shift, only watched, patient and quiet. I stumbled outside. Snow crunched softly beneath boots, cold biting through socks and gloves. The air carried pine, frost, and the hum of the night around me. The clearing was empty. Snow lay untouched, smooth, perfect. No footprints led to the window. No trail back into the woods. The face vanished. Only the faint reflection of cabin light remained on frost-laced glass. I pressed a hand to it. Cold, solid, yet still impossible. I stepped back. The forest held its breath. Shadows leaned in closer, long and patient. The hum of the cabin and frost-threaded air carried a quiet pressure. I turned slowly, scanning the tree lean. Mist curled at foot and branch, but nothing moved. Only the echo of what had been, lingering. I returned inside. Fingers brushed against frostbitten wood, grounding myself. The window stared back, dark and reflective. No face, no presence, only the cold and the stillness that pressed heavier than snow. I sat quietly, listening to the hum of the night. Every creak of log and frost-laden board magnified in the hush. The memory of that long, pale gaze lingered, patient and unblinking, as though it had imprinted itself onto the walls, into the very air of the cabin, waiting in the silence. The cabin smelled of pine and old wood. Frost curled along the edges of the windows, thin and brittle. Night settled heavy and still. A hum began, soft at first, almost mistaken for wind or the settling of logs, but it carried a regular, mechanical pulse. Steady, insistent. I pressed an ear to the wall, cold wood against skin. The hum deepened, vibrating faintly through bones. It wasn't the cabin. It came from beneath, somewhere deep underground. I stepped back, hands brushing frostbitten surfaces. Air smelled of damp earth and smoke from the dying fire. The hum threaded through the floorboards, through the walls, a vibration that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the night. I leaned closer, though it shivered beneath my fingers. A faint static prickled across the skin, like the air itself held a secret, waiting. I moved through the cabin slowly. Every shadow stretched longer in the pale firelight. The hum followed, a constant undertone, low and resonant, pressing against chest and ears. I crouched near the corner, hands tracing grain of cold wood. The vibration shifted subtly, a pulse almost like breath, or a machine quietly awake beneath the earth. Outside, the wind was still. Snow lay smooth, untouched, but inside the cabin, the hum pressed closer, deeper, threading to the walls, through floor, through air. I pressed my ear again. The cold pressed against skin. The vibration thrummed beneath, patient, alive. Impossible to locate, impossible to name. I stepped away. Every movement amplified the hush of the cabin. The fire popped softly, unnoticed by the hum beneath. It was steady, eternal, unblinking. I sat on the floor, breath shallow, chest pressing against cold boards. The hum continued, a subterranean heartbeat beneath the walls. Fingers brushed wood, tracing invisible lines, feeling the weight of the earth itself pressing up, patient and unyielding. Minutes passed, though I could not measure them. The hum threaded into the silence, into the frost, into the cold that seeped through walls and bones. Every shadow trembled slightly in response. I closed my eyes. The world contracted to vibration and frost, air sharp, cold, humming through the night. The cabin itself seemed small against it, fragile and watching. When I opened them, the firelight flickered. The hum persisted, deep, endless. I could feel it in every corner, every board, every breath I drew. I lay back against the floorboards. Snow and frost beyond the windows. Air thin, still almost solid. The hum beneath the walls persisted, and I could only listen, anchored to the vibration, waiting, breath pressed shallow against the weight of the world below. Snow lay thick over the clearing. Air sharp and still, pressing against skin. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp wood, faint ash in the corners. I stepped outside. The firewood pile had shrunk again. Each log, carefully stacked, now fewer. The cold brushed fingers and cheeks as I knelt to inspect. Tracks led away, soft impressions in snow, pressed and fading. They wandered toward the forest, then vanished, leaving only smooth white. No snap of branch, no rustle of fur. I shivered. Wind carried the faint scent of pine and frost, but nothing moved. Only the quiet, the hum of the cabin behind me, a soft reminder of warmth now distant. I touched the remaining logs. Rough bark, icy cold. The snow underfoot shifted silently, but the tracks, human, animal, or something else, had simply dissolved. I circled the pile. Snow muffled footsteps, pressed soft against frost. Every shadow seemed heavier here. The forest leaned in, patient, unblinking. I gathered some wood, stacking carefully, hands cold, fingers stiff. The logs felt smaller somehow, as if they were shrinking beneath my touch. I stepped back. The pile looked the same as before, yet diminished. Morning returned slowly. Frost lingered on every branch, brittle and sharp. I stepped out again. The firewood was smaller. The tracks led away once more, fading into nothing. I traced them, eyes following every curve. The forest swallowed their path. Air smelled faintly of damp earth, as if the woods had exhaled. I could hear the cabins faint on behind me, but it felt distant now. I touched snow with gloved hands. Cold, granular. The empty forest pressed in, silent, patient. Something had taken the wood, something that left no trace. I stacked what remained, breath puffing, fingers numb. The wind whispered through the trees. No footsteps, no crackling under snow, just a soft hum of frost against frozen bark. Night returned. The cabin walls held a faint scent of smoke and wood, but the firewood sat smaller than it had before. Tracks led away again, fading mid-path. The forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. I pressed hands to cold logs, tracing their rough edges. Snowflakes settled on sleeves and hair, melting with quiet drip. I could hear nothing but the hum of the wind and the subtle settling of the cabin. I stood still, listening to snow, cold, and silence. The firewood waited. The forest watched. And every morning, the pile grew smaller. The tracks vanished, and the unease lingered. The night was thick with frost, air sharp against my cheeks. The clearing lay quiet. Snow pressed soft under boots. I stepped out. Mist curled low, settling over the pines. The cabin, it looked different. I froze. The angle of the roof, the porch boards, shifted. Not a creak, Not a sound to mark its movement, only the stillness, heavy and close. My breath fogged in the cold, hands pressed into pockets. The smell of wood smoke lingered faintly, but the shape of the cabinet did not match memory. I circled slowly. Snow crunched beneath gloved feet, but the earth beneath the cabin showed no disturbance. No tracks, no marks. The windows reflected pale moonlight. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Something about the angle, subtle, wrong, as if gravity itself had shifted. I ran a hand along the railing. Rough, icy, yet the cabin felt lighter somehow, breathing, unmoored from the earth. The trees whispered in the wind. I could hear needles drop, soft against snow. Every shadow leaned toward the cabin, patient. Air tasted of frost and quiet unease. I stepped back, squinting. The porch now pointed slightly left. The forest behind seemed farther than it had been. The clearing itself felt stretched. I tried call inside. No echo returned. The hum of the cold pressed against ears. Even the night seemed to pause. Hands on my face. I felt the ruffle of mittens, damp with snow. The cabins were familiar, yet distant. Every log, every panel slightly askew, and the silence immense, suffocating. I circled again. Each view offered subtle dissonance. The door, the windows, the chimney shifted, not destroyed, not broken, just moved. The moonlight caught the edges of the roof. Shadows stretched and curved unnaturally. The air smelled faintly of cold smoke and pine resin, sharp and bitter. Breath came in shallow puffs. I knelt in the snow. Fingers pressed the powdery frost. No prints beneath the cabin. Nothing disturbed the clearing. Yet the cabin itself was not where it had been before. I stepped back slowly, glanced up at the sky. Stars muted, pale. The clearing seemed to tilt beneath me. Or perhaps it was a cabin, or maybe myself. I pressed a hand to the door. Cold wood, hard and real. Yet the angle, it didn't feel anchored. Something unreal hummed beneath my skin. The forest waited. The cabin waited. I waited. A breath. The snow whispered under unseen movement. I stepped back. The moonlight shimmered over boards, slightly askew, and I understood nothing would explain it. The night closed around me. Fog thick and low. The cabin sat, just out of place, silent, patient, and I could do nothing but watch. The night pressed against the ridge. Air sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and frost. I climbed slowly, boots sinking into powdery snow. Above me, the sky hung heavy and still. Mist curled between the peaks, pale and hesitant. Then I saw them. Silhouettes lined the ridge. Still, pale, watching. Each flickered with a faint light, blinking slowly in quiet rhythm. I held my breath. The wind whispered through jagged rocks. Static seemed to hum at the edges of hearing, and my heartbeat felt too loud. I stepped closer. Snow crunched beneath my weight. The figures did not move. Their lights pulsed, soft, eerie, deliberate. I leaned against a tree. Fingers pressed the rough bark, damp with frost. The cold bit my face, but my eyes stayed fixed on the ridge. One blinked, then another, all in unison, like some ancient counting. The mist swirled, wrapping the peaks in white. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet stone. I shifted, trying not to make a sound. The wind caught a distant branch. Saw footsteps of snow sliding, echoing up the slope. The figures remained, silent, distant, impossible to reach. A pause. The cold seeped into my bones. My breath fogged, drifting with the mist. Then, all at once, the lights vanished. Nothing remained but the snow and the low hum of the ridge. No movement. No echo. I blinked. Mist pressed close, muffling the world. The shapes gone. Only the quiet, vast and waiting. I stepped forward slowly. The ridge stretched, pale and empty. The air smelled of frozen pine, sharp, clean, and unreal. I pressed my hand to my chest, felt the rapid thump of my heart. Shadows lingered in the snow, but no footprints marked the place the lights had been. A hush settled. Even the wind stilled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I listened, static in my ears, soft rustling far below. I turned back, eyes sweeping the dark peaks. Nothing moved, yet the rhythm, the blinking, it lingered in the mind. Like a whisper I could not shake. The night deepened. Fog wrapped the ridge tighter. The cold pressed close. And I understood some presence waits, patient, just beyond reach. The snow crunched as I walked back. Each step echoed softly. The ridge lay empty. The lights had gone, but their pulse remained, fading slowly into the dark. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Snow pressed softly against the windows. A chill crept along the floorboards, settling beneath my bare feet. I lay in bed, eyes tracing the ceiling's pale grain. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but the next morning I saw the scratches. Thin, shallow lines clawed across the wood. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine. Cold pressed at my shoulders. Each night, I woke to the creak of timber, something restless above, shifting. By morning, the scratches multiplied, deepened, jagged like fingernails scraping slowly, carefully. I pressed my palm to the ceiling, smooth where my hand was, rough where the marks lingered. A faint hum settled in the walls. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something beneath the cabin, breathing along with the scratches. I tried to ignore them, pulled the blanket over my chin, closed my eyes. But the line seemed to crawl, stretching, twisting, reaching closer with each dawn. The light through the frost-streaked windows fell in pale stripes across the room. Dust motes floated, catching like static, and there, the ceiling seemed alive. I could hear it then. Soft, deliberate scratches layered over the hum of winter outside. A rhythm, a pulse, calling. I sat up slowly. Fingers grazed the cold wood. The marks had multiplied again overnight. Each one seemed to twist when I looked away. A breath of wind rattled the cabin door. Shadows moved across the walls. I felt them watching from above, from the spaces between the beams. I pressed my ear to the ceiling. What was hollow beneath my touch. Something shifted inside, low and mechanical at first, then soft, like a breath. I pulled the blanket tighter. The hum in the walls deepened. Scratches grew longer, sharper. The cabin seemed smaller, pressing in, as if breathing slowly around me. I whispered into the dark. No reply, only the scratching, multiplying, etching patterns I could not follow. By nightfall, the marks were almost too many to count. Jagged, overlapping, endless. The air was thick with dust and cold. Every creak of timber felt deliberate. Every shadow held intent. I touched the ceiling again. Fingers brushed against a fresh, wet edge. Shivers ran down my spine. I wanted to leave to run into the snow, but the cabin seemed to breathe softly, holding me inside its walls. The wind outside died. Even the forest grew silent. And the scratches, they waited, quiet now but alive. I lay back down, eyes on the ceiling. The marks above glistened faintly in the pale light, each line a whisper, each scratch a memory of something patient, something watching. The night went on. The cabin exhaled softly. I could feel it pressing, breathing, and the marks waited for me to sleep. And when I finally closed my eyes, I could still feel the scratches stretching above, multiplying, endless, hungry. I woke to a forest draped in black. The sky refused its usual glow. Dawn had vanished, swallowed whole. Snow lay heavy on the branches. It reflected nothing. The world felt hollow, waiting. I stepped to the window. The glass was cold against my fingertips. Shadows clung to the trees. But there was a faint light, as if the forest itself had begun to glow from some hidden, unseen source. The glow pulsed softly, like breathing. I could smell damp pine and the faint trace of smoke from the fire pit. The air pressed against my lungs, heavy, expectant. I wrapped my arms around myself. The cabin floorboards creaked beneath my weight. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow deeper. Outside, the pale light moved slowly. Branches shifted as though nudged by invisible hands. The snow sparkled, but not with sun. It shivered with something else, a quiet, living energy. I tried call out. My voice sounded strange, hollow, swallowed by the black morning. Nothing answered but the soft hum of the unseen glow. I walked to the door. The handle was icy, biting against my skin. I opened it slowly. The forest pressed in, luminous, silent, unnatural. Each step into the snow left prints that felt almost alive. The faint glow seemed to swirl around me. I could feel it brushing against my cheeks, tickling the hair on my arms, and whispering just beyond hearing. No birds, no wind, only the quiet pulse of light. It seeped into the air, into my chest, and made my heartbeat sound wrong. I stopped in the middle of the clearing. The cabin behind me was dark and still. The glow from the trees danced across the snow in pale waves. It seemed to breathe with the forest itself. I wanted to step back inside. I wanted warmth, the ordinary, the normal, but the glow, it moved closer, as if noticing me. I held my breath. The forest shifted. The glow throbbed. Every tree seemed to lean in, watching. I whispered my own name. It echoed softly, almost like the light itself was repeating me. I could feel a pulse in the snow beneath my feet. Tiny vibrations that weren't mine. The air smelled of wet earth, of cold, frozen needles. And beneath that, something faintly metallic. Something alive, hidden, waiting. I stepped back toward the cabin. Every footfall seemed slow, deliberate. The glow followed, curling around the trunks, slipping closer with each heartbeat. Inside, I pressed myself against the wall. The cabin felt impossibly small. I could hear it breathing, mirroring the pulse of forest outside. The light moved in slow waves, never reaching the door, but always close. Watching, waiting. The forest alive without sun, without warmth, but filled with quiet intent. I sat on the floor, knees drawn up. The glow seeped under the windowsills. Shadows bent strangely, like the cabin itself was listening. I breathed. The forest breathed. Everything outside glimmered faintly, hauntingly, as if the world had become a memory of light and nothing else. And I realized the morning would not come. The sun would not rise. I was alone, and the forest watched, glowing, patient, endless. I woke to the same cold stillness. The cabin breathed softly around me, its walls pulsing with quiet hum, like it had learned to live without me, or with me, in some strange rhythm I could not follow. I dressed slowly. The wool of my sweater scratched my arms. The floorboards whispered beneath my feet. Outside, the fog hugged the trees, dense and low, muting the forest into shadows. I decided to leave. I had to. The air pressed against my lungs with urgency, and the darkness felt heavier than sleep. I opened the door. The cold hit my face, sharp and metallic. Snow or mist, I could not tell. The cabin stood behind me, familiar, but the world had shifted. The road I had followed before, gone. Where there had been a path, there was only thick fog and trees, twisting into angles I did not remember. Branches arched strangely, their tips brushing against the sky like fingers. I stepped forward. The snow crunched underfoot, but the prints seemed wrong. They did not match my weight. They staggered, careful, deliberate. The forest had rearranged itself. A faint hum vibrated from the cabin, throbbing through the snow, through the roots beneath my feet, through the air I inhaled. I tried to turn back, but the cabin seemed to lean away from me, its edges curling subtly in the dim light. The hum deepened, rising to a low crescendo, like it was breathing in time with the forest. Shadows stretched long, then snapped into shape, then vanished. Every tree, every branch seemed alive, watching, waiting. I shivered. Cold air stung my cheeks, but there was warmth beneath it, as though the earth itself pulsed beneath my soles. I walked slowly, eyes searching for the road that had existed yesterday, for any sign of the ordinary, but there was none. The hum followed. It echoed in my chest, in my ears, like the cabin had learned to speak without voice. I stopped in a small clearing. The fog curled around my legs, and I noticed the snow here was untouched, perfect, pristine, no tracks, no path, nothing human. I pressed my hand to the bark of a tree. It was warm. The trunk seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. I withdrew, breath shallow. The forest breathed too. I tried calling out. My voice sounded strange, distant, swallowed. The hum rose in reply, as if the cabin had heard me through the walls, through the roots, through the air itself. I turned back toward the cabin. It sat at an impossible angle, leaning just slightly, its corners soft, like it was watching, waiting for me to cross the threshold. I wanted to flee. I wanted the ordinary, the old road, the path I had walked so many times. But the world had folded itself around the cabin. and I was inside that fold, trapped in a place that remembered nothing but me. The snow sparkled faintly. The fog swirled in slow eddies. The hum throbbed beneath the ground, resonating through the bones of the earth. And I realized, as I pressed my hands to my ears, that the cabin would not let me go. I breathed, the forest breathed, the cabin breathed, and I stood alone, with nowhere to walk, nowhere to turn, and the hum of the cabin filling every shadow, every silence, every heartbeat. The night stretched endlessly. The fog thickened. The hum rose, subtle, insistent, alive. I could feel it learning me, measuring me as I measured it, and the world outside had vanished completely. I sank to the snow, knees drawn up. The cabin watched, and the forest held its breath. I was still alive, still human, but I understood in the quiet that this place did not want me to leave. I closed my eyes, and the hum filled my skull, slow, steady, patient. It whispered a promise I could not escape, that I would remain in the cabin that breathed, in the forest that rearranged itself forever.